On today's show, a bonus podcast to break down a Friday evening trade for the Hawks, adding a new piece, swapping what becomes kind of a challenge trade for Atlanta. We'll get into the details, why this happened, or maybe why it happened anyway, and much more, and all of that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to a bonus episode of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Friday evening here in late July. And I want to encourage you, as I always do at the top of the podcast, to make us your first listen each and every day. Please go ahead and subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find podcasts, whether it be Apple, Spotify. We're also on YouTube, where you should be liking this episode and subscribing to the podcast on that video platform. And I just actually talked to all of you on the same podcast feed. So if you missed it, and a lot of it's still relevant right now, I recorded episode 1772 of this podcast just about 3 or 4 hours ago and posted it in the feed on Friday afternoon. That was a full episode. We talked about over-unders. We talked about the Hawks depth chart and much more. And again, that is still relevant at this point in time. But in true Hawks fashion, they had a transaction after that. And rather than leaving it until Monday on the next podcast, I'm doing sort of a bonus short edition of the show. It will not be full length, but I wanted to get something out to react to a real live trade. So I should at least note this. As of Friday evening, when I'm recording this, the Hawks have not announced this trade yet, but it was reported by Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, confirmed by me and others. So this is going to be happening. It's just not official at this point in time. I guess in theory, until it's official, it could expand. But for now, what I have heard and what it's been reported as is a two-player, two-team transaction. It is the Hawks and the Suns agreeing to swap EJ Liddell, who the Hawks acquired in the Pelicans trade with DeJounte Murray involved, etc. A few weeks ago, he played at Summer League, and he'll be heading to Phoenix in exchange for David Roddy. So David Roddy is a former first-round pick, a guy that people might have remembered from his time in college. He was kind of a fan favorite at Colorado State, and we'll kind of get into that, but it's essentially a challenge trade. It's a one-for-one. The money is similar, as we'll talk about in a second, but it's essentially a swap of two guys who are, depth pieces, depth forwards on their two teams. It's kind of like a 14th man for 14th man kind of trade. And again, like it really is a challenge, like a throwback. We think this guy is better than you think this guy is potentially for Atlanta. It's already been reported by Lauren Williams of the AJC that the Hawks just like Roddy's fit on the roster better than Liddell's. And you could debate that. I think that there actually is a debate as to who's the better player. They have differing skill sets to some degree. They're all also kind of similar in some aspects, but a couple of, backup power forward types that are getting swapped for each other in this trade. So number one, we'll start here. Who is David Roddy? What is David Roddy, etc. And basically, I don't know, I said it before, but he's actually a 6'4" power forward, which I'm not misstating that. That's actually what he's listed at. 6'4", 255. His nickname is, and I quote, Big Body Roddy. He is a hefty gentleman, let's just say. But again, first round pick of Memphis a couple of years ago. He's played 2 years in the league at this point. Last year he got traded midseason to Phoenix and then finished the season out with the Suns. He kind of had a rep as a guy who could maybe be a versatile defender up and down the line. He is strong, as you might expect. Not the best athlete, not a crazy zero athlete either, from what I understand and have watched, but not someone who's going to be a super scalable player. At the same time, he is a guy who has pedigree as a first round pick fairly recently. Now, defensively is kind of the side of the floor where he's been a little bit better. The numbers tell that story from EPM, from on-off stuff, etc. He's been okay there, but not someone who I think has been as good as maybe people thought he might be in Memphis. But switchable, physical, played both forward spots. I got questions about his height, basically, and is he actually a forward? And the answer is yes. According to Basketball Reference, he has played 96% of his career minutes at forward, whereas the gap there between him and Liddell on this way is that Liddell is kind of a power forward, maybe even leaning towards center. Despite the fact that he's undersized, he's a rim protector. He kind of plays more like a traditional big, despite being 6'6", 6'7". Roddy is also undersized, but he's more of a combo forward. He's played some 3, he's played some 4, actually a little bit of center in Phoenix this year, according to what has been listed, but only a tiny amount and a tiny sample size with the Suns. But he's definitely a forward. That's what he is. As for what he does well, I think, again, you're backing on the defense, a little bit more switchable on the perimeter than Liddell. Liddell is a better rim protector, but Roddy has been a good rebounder. Not an excellent one, but a good enough one for his size. He has some decent passing skills for a player of his size, but what he hasn't been so far in his NBA career is efficient at all on offense. He has a career 50.2% true shooting percentage. That's very bad especially for a non-guard. And the thought was at the college level, he's going to be able to shoot a little bit more. He was more of a self-creator in college, but he has shot about 30% from three on about 400 or so attempts from three-point range. So not a overwhelming sample size, but what we've seen so far, he's not made shots so far in his 2 years career, in his 2-year career in Memphis and in Phoenix. So that's the kind of the archetype of the player. Again, switchable, can make the right decisions. I haven't covered him, so I've not seen him as much as some other people are. I'm trying to react to this in real time. But the theory of him was always a guy who could be a helpful defensive piece, not kill you on offense, maybe make an open shot. It's just that the offensive side of the floor has been really rough to the point where I'm looking at this now. In EPM this year, he was in the 9th percentile offensively. 16th percentile as a rookie. So he's been according to the advanced numbers, really, really rough offensively. And that is probably why he was available for this kind of return in some respects. Still, though, a guy with pedigree and a guy who could be a little bit more of a fit because he is more of a wing/forward than Liddell, who was kind of trending towards the big man spots. So that's that aspect. It does, as I was just talking to my friend Kevin Chenard of Hawks.com about this on Twitter, you could argue this it takes away a true big and moves that slot down a little bit, which the Hawks probably needed to do on some level because Liddell, while I view him as a 4, is a 4-5 versus Roddy being a 3-4. That is helpful. He is a little bit more expensive than Liddell, less than $1 million. But, given where the Hawks are, trying to avoid the tax and all that stuff, that could be potentially notable, I would say. At the same time, he also is a player who has a team option for next year. So Roddy's team option is for $4.8 million. He's actually on a rookie scale deal as a former first-round pick. And the thing there is that the Hawks have to decide on that option by October. So at the same time, when the Hawks are deciding on Kobe Buffkin's option, for instance, for the following season, they have to do the same with Roddy. At this moment in time, I would assume they will not pick that up, but it's not a foregone conclusion by any means. That is definitely possible that they could pick it up, and we'll leave it there for now. We will have more, though, in a second when it comes to how things might break down on the salary cap front. But first, a word from our partners on today's podcast. All right, so I teased this a little bit a second ago, but the other aspect of this trade is that the Hawks do add a little bit of payroll, and that puts things in a little bit of interesting contrast because the Hawks now have 15 players still on guaranteed contracts, which is where they were before, but they added a little bit more than $500,000 in salary. And if they were to cut Bruno Fernando, which they're not guaranteed to do, and by the way, as a reminder, Bruno's guarantee date is only about a week away, a little bit less than a week away. August 1st is his new date. But with Bruno on the roster, they're technically over the tax line. However, they can't have 16 guys on the roster anyway. So if they were to, let's just say, remove Bruno from the roster, remove Garrison, whoever, how you want to do that without penalty. And just for the record, they cannot waive Roddy and they cannot waive Zeller without paying them. Those guys are on guaranteed contracts. People always ask about that. That's the reason why that's not just more of a talking point, and why Bruno is a talking point. With that said, the tax line is about $170.8 million. And the Hawks right now with 15 guys, if you remove Bruno, are at about 169.5. So like 1.2 or so, 1.2.5, something like that, short of the tax line, even with this addition. So it doesn't put them in the tax. Does it matter that much? No. I was a little bit surprised about this just because it adds salary, but because they are a little bit comfortable under the tax line, if they were to waive Bruno, it isn't quite as eyebrow raising as I might have thought originally when I thought that might be a little bit closer to the tax line. But that is a situation to monitor. I've said before, I'll say it again now. I believe the Hawks are not going to pay the tax this year. No one thinks that they're going to. So that's an area to watch, let's just say, in the coming days. But they're still under, even though they made this trade. So what happens now? Couple questions that I could sort of answer now. If the trade is announced, and again, this is an if they announce the trade as a 1-for-1 swap, etc., the way that it's been reported, Roddy cannot be aggregated in a trade. He could be traded again, but not along with someone else. So somebody asked me about, could they put Roddy with Larry Nance? The answer is no, for 2 months. Now, that's still before the season starts if they wait 2 months, but usually you want to get your business done a little bit earlier than that. So technically, he cannot be aggregated for 2 months. File that away. Same with Zeller, by the way. He cannot be aggregated together. So people always want to put Zeller in trades. You can't do that unless it's unless it's actually by himself, compared to throwing him with Zeller, throwing him with Roddy and Zeller or Roddy and Bruno or whatever you want to say. They cannot be aggregated. Keep that in mind. And then from here, there is a question about is Roddy good? And the answer is TBD, I have to say. Now, the same question can and should be asked about EJ Liddell, who the Hawks, yes, traded for, but he was more of a throw-in to make the money work. And, I covered him in Summer League. He had one really good game in Las Vegas, but it was always an open question as to whether the Hawks actively wanted Liddell or if they just kind of had to take him in that trade. This at least signals that the Hawks are making a proactive move to trade for David Roddy. That doesn't mean that they're committed to him forever and ever. It might just be a situation where they think they think Roddy is better than Liddell. It probably is that simple, to be honest. The money isn't that far apart. So the combination of positional value, they're both kind of undersized forwards. Roddy's more of a wing. Liddell's more of a big. If Roddy could shoot, that actually would be a guy that I would like. The question is, can he shoot? And right now, the data says no to that. But it's only 2 years. It's not a huge sample size. And people in Memphis like him. We'll see. But I'm okay with them taking a flyer. So as for my opinion of the deal, there's a chance Liddell is better than Roddy, I do think. But as far as impact on the Hawks, neither one of these guys is going to be projected to play a lot. Liddell wasn't going to play a lot coming in with the current roster. I think Roddy probably still falls in that same camp, but there is a little bit more of a clear line for Roddy if the jump shot plays because defensively he's a little bit more useful, and that Liddell is more of a rim protector, but Roddy is more of a guy who can you can throw out there on a big forward and have him not be embarrassed. Because right now, after Jalen and DeAndre Hunter, they don't really have that other bulky forward type defensively. Risache is very skinny. Obviously, I think he's going to be a good defender, but not someone who's going to throw in a big physical forward right now, probably. So another body on the wing, not the worst thing in the world. You can make the Sadiq Bey parallel there. The difference is that while Bey didn't shoot it well this year, Bey does get guarded, and Bey has a long record of being a pretty good shooter before the season, whereas Roddy does not. So that's the difference there. Obviously, not super similar players in that Bey is a lot more proven, but body type, physicality, all that stuff. We'll have more on this later, I'm sure, but for now, I'm going to sign off, and that's kind of where we are. So big picture, it's a swap of depth forwards. It's not the biggest deal in the world. The Hawks do add a little bit of salary. They kind of reset the clock a little bit, and they make a proactive move to go out and get a guy who's 23 years old, who still has fans in the league, and we'll see if Roddy can kind of figure out his offense. He wasn't able to do that in Memphis or Phoenix, and for the Suns, it kind of makes sense. They save some money, all that stuff. Liddell's maybe a better shooter than Roddy. We'll see. But on the Hawks side, it's fine. It's not a huge needle mover, but because we cover every single aspect of this Hawks team, I want to get you some coverage on this on a Friday evening. So I'll sign off there. Please subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about the show. I really appreciate you listening and enjoy your weekend. We'll see you all next time.